Story number 1. Whispers of the Snow-Covered Village. I still remember the winters in Elmridge like they were yesterday, despite the years that have since slipped away. Nestled deep within the northern forests of Scandinavia, our village was a place where traditions ran as deep as the roots of the ancient pines that surrounded us. Snow was not just a weather phenomenon here, it was a presence, a living entity that blanketed our world in silence and mystery. Elmridge was small, barely a dot on the map, but rich with stories passed down through generations. The most persistent of these was the legend of Astrid, a woman whose life had been tragically cut short, her spirit forever bound to the snow that fell each winter. They said that whenever the snow lay thick and heavy, Astrid's ghost roamed the village, her sorrow echoing through the stillness, seeking vengeance for the injustice she had endured. In the winter of 1975, the snow fell harder than ever before. It was the kind of night where the world seemed to hold its breath, the flakes piling higher with each passing hour until the village was swallowed by a thick, white blanket. I was 18 then, working as the village's new teacher, eager to make my mark in this secluded community. That December night would mark the darkest chapter in Elmridge's history. The Thompsons were the first to disappear, a family of 6. They had moved to Elmridge 2 years prior, seeking the tranquility our village promised. They were outsiders in many ways, wealthy, well-traveled, but kind-hearted and eager to embrace our way of life. On the night of December 12th, as the storm raged outside, the Thompsons were at home, gathered around the fireplace, their laughter mingling with the crackling of the fire. As midnight approached, the wind howled louder, as if protesting the snow's relentless assault. It was then that Mrs. Thompson noticed something, a shadow moving outside their window, indistinct and fleeting. Probably just a deer, she reassured her children, though her voice betrayed a hint of unease. The next morning, the storm had passed, leaving behind a landscape transformed into a monochromatic world of white. We gathered in the village square to assess the damage and clear the snow from our paths. That's when we heard the news. Mr. Thompson had failed to return from his morning walk, and neither had the rest of his family. Panic set in as we organized search parties, venturing into the dense forest where the snow lay deepest. Hours turned into days, and despite our efforts, there was no sign of the Thompsons. The only evidence was a series of footprints leading from their home into the forest, disappearing into the thickening snow. It was as if they had been swallowed by the very legend that haunted our village. Whispers of Astrid's curse spread like wildfire. Some villagers claimed to have seen her ghost wandering the forest, her presence marked by an unnatural chill and the sound of distant crying. Skeptics dismissed these stories as superstitious nonsense, but the fear in their eyes told a different story. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. As the village teacher, I was responsible for the children's safety, and the thought of Astrid's spirit taking another family weighed heavily on my mind. I began to delve into the old tales, seeking answers in the faded pages of our ancestors' journals and the worn tapestries that adorned our communal hall. One evening, as I sat by the window watching the snowflakes dance in the moonlight, I heard it, the unmistakable sound of a child's cry, soft and forlorn, echoing through the stillness. My heart raced as I recognized it from the stories. Astrid's sorrowful lament, a sound that seemed to pierce the very fabric of my soul. Determined to confront the legend, I decided to venture into the forest myself, hoping to find some clue or perhaps a way to lay Astrid's spirit to rest. Armed with a lantern and a resolve born of desperation, I set out on a path where the snow lay thickest, the world around me hushed and oppressive. The deeper I walked, the more the forest seemed to close in, the trees towering like silent sentinels against the night sky. The lantern cast long, wavering shadows that danced and shifted with each step, creating an illusion of movement in the otherwise unchanging landscape. The air grew colder, each breath a visible puff that mingled with the falling snow. Then, amidst the swirling flakes, I saw her, a figure clad in a long, dark coat, her face obscured by the hood. She stood at the edge of a clearing, her presence both haunting and heartbreaking. As I approached, her sorrowful gaze met mine, and I felt an overwhelming sense of empathy mixed with fear. "Why are you here?" I asked softly, my voice barely audible over the howling wind. She didn't respond. Her eyes filled with a pain that seemed to stretch beyond time. Instead, she turned and began to walk deeper into the forest. Her movements slow and deliberate. I followed, compelled by a need to understand, to help her find peace. The clearing opened up to reveal a small, frozen pond, its surface smooth and glassy under the moonlight. She stopped at the water's edge, her reflection shimmering in the ice like a ghostly apparition. I realized then that she wasn't just a spirit of vengeance. She was a reflection of loss and unfulfilled longing. "Astrid," I whispered, recognizing her from the tales. "What do you want?" Her form began to shimmer, the edges of her figure blurring as if caught between worlds. "Justice," she replied, her voice echoing through the clearing. "They took everything from me." I understood then the curse wasn't about revenge. It was about acknowledgement, about giving her story the recognition it deserved. The Thompsons had unknowingly become part of her eternal mourning, victims of a tragedy that had never been fully addressed. Determined to honor her memory, I returned to the village and rallied the community to hold a memorial for the Thompsons and for Astrid. We gathered in the town square, the snow falling gently around us as we lit candles and shared stories of those we had lost. In that moment, the legend of Astrid transformed from a tale of fear to one of remembrance and healing. As the last candle flickered, I felt a warmth envelop me, a sense of peace settling over the village. The oppressive chill lifted, and the sound of distant crying faded into a serene silence. Astrid's spirit, now acknowledged and remembered, found the closure she had long sought. Years have passed since that cold December night, and Elmridge has moved forward, the memory of the Thompsons and Astrid serving as a poignant reminder of the importance of compassion and understanding. The legend of Astrid no longer brings fear but rather a sense of unity and respect for the past. But sometimes, when the snow falls thick and heavy, I still hear the faint echoes of that night, a soft, sorrowful whisper carried on the wind. It's a reminder that some spirits never truly fade, and that every loss deserves to be acknowledged and remembered. Story number 2. Frozen silence. I've always been drawn to the unknown, to places where the veil between reality and the supernatural seems thin. So when I heard about the abandoned house in the remote reaches of Alaska, shrouded in eternal ice, my curiosity got the better of me. My name is Ethan Parker, and what began as a simple investigation into local legends quickly spiraled into a nightmare I still can't escape. The story of the Frostbite House has been whispered among the few residents of the nearby town for decades. Built in the early 1960s by a reclusive hunter named Samuel Grayson, the wooden structure stood proudly at the edge of a vast, unforgiving wilderness. Samuel was known for his solitary nature, spending months at a time tracking elusive game through the dense forests. But one harsh winter, everything changed. It was the winter of 1968 when Samuel ventured deeper into the wilderness than ever before. A fierce snowstorm descended upon the area, trapping him in the unforgiving landscape. Days turned into weeks, and Samuel was never seen again. When rescue teams finally arrived, all they found was his abandoned house, encased in a thick layer of ice that refused to melt. No matter how much the weather changed, the locals soon believed the house was cursed, haunted by Samuel's restless spirit, forever trapped in a frozen limbo. I arrived in the town of Frosthaven on a crisp November morning, the sky a pale gray and the air biting with the promise of another long winter. The townsfolk were wary of outsiders, especially those curious about the cursed house. They warned me of strange accidents and unexplained phenomena that befell anyone who dared to explore the icy ruins. But my skepticism and thirst for the truth pushed me forward. I rented a sturdy truck from Old Tom, the town's grizzled mechanic, and set out toward the coordinates provided by the local library archives. The journey was treacherous, the roads barely visible under the relentless snowfall. As I navigated the narrow, winding path, the landscape grew more desolate, the trees heavy with ice and the silence almost oppressive. After hours of driving, I finally saw it, the frostbite house, standing forlornly against the backdrop of a frozen wilderness. The house was a haunting silhouette of its former self, the wooden planks warped and brittle under the weight of centuries of ice. Thick layers of frost clung to every surface, making it appear as if the house was encased in a glass coffin. I parked the truck at a safe distance and approached on foot, the crunch of snow beneath my boots the only sound breaking the stillness. The air was unnaturally cold, a biting chill that seeped into my bones despite my heavy coat. I reached the front door, its wood swollen and cracked from the relentless freeze, and pushed it open with a creak that echoed through the empty house. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of decay and old wood. Moonlight streamed through the broken windows, casting eerie shadows on the floors. I took out my flashlight, its beam cutting through the darkness, and began my exploration. The house was a maze of rooms, each one frozen in time, the remnants of Samuel's life scattered like forgotten memories. The living room was the first room I entered, a grand fireplace now cold and empty. A thick layer of ice covered the furniture, turning the once cozy space into a desolate, otherworldly chamber. I moved cautiously, my footsteps muffled by the snow that had settled on the floor. As I approached the mantel, I noticed old photographs of Samuel, his stern face staring back at me from the frost-covered frames. I felt a shiver run down my spine, but I pressed on, moving toward the staircase that led to the upper floors. Each step groaned under my weight, the sound amplified in the eerie silence. As I ascended, the temperature seemed to drop further, the cold growing more intense, making it difficult to breathe. Reaching the second floor, I entered what must have been Samuel's study. The room was cluttered with hunting gear and maps, all covered in ice. A large wooden desk dominated the space, its surface thick with frost. I approached it, my flashlight revealing a journal partially buried under a pile of papers. Carefully, I wiped away the ice and began to read. December 15th, 1968. The storm shows no signs of abating. Supplies are dwindling, and the isolation weighs heavily on me. I fear I may not survive much longer. If anyone finds this, know that I am sorry for leaving my family behind. May peace find me in the cold embrace of the wilderness. The entry sent a pang of sorrow through me. Samuel Grayson, a man stranded by nature's fury, desperate to survive. But why had his spirit been unable to find peace? The legend spoke of his restless ghost, but I needed more answers. As I delved deeper into the house, I began to sense a presence, an unseen force watching my every move. The whispers of the past seemed to echo through the halls, a soft, sorrowful lament that grew louder with each step. I reached the attic, the final barrier between me and the heart of the mystery. The attic was a clutter of old furniture and forgotten belongings, the air thick with dust and ice. In the center of the room stood a large, ornate mirror, its surface completely covered in frost. Drawn to it, I wiped away the ice, revealing my reflection staring back at me. But as I looked closer, I saw something or someone behind me in the mirror. A figure clad in old-fashioned hunting attire stood just behind my shoulder, his face hidden in the shadows of his hat. I spun around, heart pounding, but there was no one there. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, as if pleading for something I couldn't comprehend. I turned back to the mirror, my fear mounting. The figure was still there, now more defined, his hollow eyes staring into mine with a desperation that was almost human. "Help me," he whispered, his voice a ghostly echo that resonated through the attic. Tears welled up in my eyes as I realized the depth of his suffering. "What do you need?" I asked, my voice trembling with empathy. His form began to shimmer, the ice around him melting away as his true self emerged. A man broken by tragedy, his spirit unable to move on from the moment he lost everything. "My family," he murmured. "They never found me. I am trapped in this frozen place, waiting for them to come and find me." Determined to help, I reached out, my hand passing through his ethereal form as if he were made of mist. "I can't bring them back, but maybe I can help you find peace." The room grew warmer, the oppressive cold lifting as his sorrow began to ease. "Thank you," he whispered, his form starting to fade. "May the snow finally cover my pain." With those final words, Samuel's spirit dissipated, leaving behind a sense of calm and closure that had been missing for decades. The whispers ceased, replaced by a serene silence that filled the attic. I stood there for a moment, feeling the weight of his gratitude and the peace he had found. Leaving the frostbite house felt different, lighter, as if a burden had been lifted from my soul. The legend of the cursed house had led me to uncover a story of love, loss, and redemption that had been buried under layers of ice and time. As I drove back to Frosthaven, the snow continued to fall, but it felt different now, a gentle reminder of the healing that had taken place. The townsfolk welcomed me back with a mix of skepticism and awe. I shared my experience, telling them of Samuel's tragic fate and the peace he had finally found. Slowly, the fear and superstition surrounding the frostbite house began to fade, replaced by a newfound respect for the spirits that lingered in the cold shadows. But sometimes, on particularly cold nights, I catch a faint whisper on the wind, a soft, sorrowful echo that reminds me of the thin veil between the living and the dead, and the enduring power of compassion to mend even the deepest wounds. Story number 3. Frozen Friend. I never believed in curses or restless spirits. Growing up in a small town in Japan, stories of Eerie ghosts were common, but I always dismissed them as mere folklore. That belief shattered the night my family's life spiraled into tragedy, all linked to a simple snow doll my sister, Yuki, had crafted. It was the first heavy snowfall of the season, blanketing our town in a serene layer of white. Yuki, a bright 7-year-old with an imagination as vast as the winter landscape, decided to create a snow doll. She named it Hannah, her little friend to keep her company during the long, cold nights. I watched her build Hannah with a mix of amusement and affection, oblivious to the dark path this innocent act would set us on. The next morning, the world outside our window glittered with untouched snow, but beneath the beauty, an air of unease began to settle. That day, our lives took a devastating turn. My wife, Ko, was involved in a severe car accident on her way to work. The news hit us like a blizzard, leaving us numb and heartbroken. Yuki struggled to understand why her beloved mother was gone, and Hannah became her only solace. Days turned into weeks, and our grief was compounded by another tragedy. My father, the pillar of our family, disappeared without a trace. We searched tirelessly, but he was nowhere to be found. The only clue was a single footprint leading into the nearby forest. Swallowed by the relentless snow, despair hung over our home like a heavy storm cloud, and Yuki's only comfort remained her snow doll, Hannah. One cold December night, as the wind howled outside and snow piled higher against our windows, I decided to confront the growing fear that Hannah might be more than just a snow creation. The legends spoke of cursed dolls, enchanted objects that brought misfortune to those who possessed them. I had always laughed off these tales, but now, faced with the loss of my family, skepticism waned. I approached Yuki's room, where Hannah sat prominently on her bed. The doll looked unchanged, its coal eyes staring blankly ahead, its scarf fluttering gently despite the stillness of the room. I reached out to pick it up, intending to dispose of it and perhaps break the cycle of tragedy that had befallen us. As my fingers touched the cold snow, a chill ran down my spine, and the room seemed to darken unnaturally. "Yuki," I called softly, hoping to draw her out of her sorrow. There was no response, only the eerie silence amplified by the howling wind outside. I placed Hannah back on the bed, my heart heavy with a sense of foreboding. That night, the nightmares began. I saw visions of Hannah coming to life, her coal eyes gleaming with malevolence, her scarf tightening around her neck as she whispered my name. Yuki woke up crying, clutching her blanket, claiming she saw Hannah moving on her own. The once comforting presence of the snow doll had transformed into a source of terror. Determined to find answers, I delved into the town's history, uncovering old stories of a family who had lost everything to a cursed doll decades ago. The patriarch had crafted a snow doll similar to Hannah, believing it would bring joy to his children. Instead, it brought misfortune and heartbreak, leading to the untimely deaths of his wife and children. The town had long since buried the story, but the echoes of that tragedy seemed to reverberate through the generations. Realizing that Hannah was the key to our suffering, I sought the help of an elderly neighbor, Mrs. Sato, who was known for her knowledge of local legends and spiritual matters. She listened intently as I recounted our story, her eyes reflecting the sorrow of her own losses. "The doll must be appeased," she said softly. "You need to perform a ritual to release the spirit trapped within Hannah. Only then can peace return to your family." Under Mrs. Sato's guidance, we prepared for the ritual. On the next heavy snowfall, we gathered outside our home. The landscape transformed into a frozen wonderland. She instructed us to build a circle of salt around Hannah, symbolizing protection and purification. We placed offerings of rice and tea nearby, tokens of respect and remembrance. As we began the chant, the temperature plummeted further, the snow swirling in unnatural patterns around us. Hannah stood motionless, her coal eyes reflecting the flickering candlelight. Suddenly, a shadowy figure emerged from the swirling snow, a woman dressed in old-fashioned attire, her face pale and sorrowful. "Why do you disturb my peace?" she whispered, her voice echoing through the night air. "We seek to free you," I replied, my voice trembling but resolute. "Release us from this curse." Tears welled up in her ghostly eyes as she reached out, her hand passing through Hannah's form. "I am bound to this doll, forever waiting for what was lost. Help me find peace, and I will leave you alone." The air grew warmer as we continued the ritual, the oppressive cold lifting as the shadowy figure began to fade. Hannah's form shimmered, the ice melting away to reveal the sorrowful expression of the woman who had once been trapped by her grief. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice now filled with relief. "May you find the peace I could not." With those final words, she vanished, leaving behind a calm stillness that settled over our home. The snow no longer felt suffocating, and the nightmares ceased, replaced by a newfound sense of hope and healing. In the weeks that followed, life began to return to normal. Yuki found solace in her school and made new friends, her laughter once again filling our home. The tragedies that had plagued us seemed like distant memories, shadows of a past that we had finally overcome. But sometimes, during the quiet moments of winter, I catch a faint whisper on the wind, a soft, sorrowful echo that reminds me of the fragile balance between life and loss, and the enduring power of compassion to heal even the deepest wounds. Story number 4. Whispers on the Frozen Lake. Winter in Minnesota is unforgiving, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones and stays there, no matter how many layers you pile on. I've always loved the stark beauty of the frozen landscape, the way the snow blankets everything in silence. But there's a darkness that comes with it, one that the locals speak of in hushed tones, the legend of the man on Blackwater Lake. I moved to the small town of Frostvale 5 years ago, seeking refuge from the chaos of city life. The tranquility was exactly what I needed, or so I thought. Blackwater Lake was the town's centerpiece, a vast expanse of ice during the winter months, attracting ice fishermen and thrill-seekers alike. But beneath its serene surface lies a chilling mystery. It was a particularly frigid December evening when my curiosity got the better of me. The temperature had plummeted to record lows, and the wind howled through the trees like a restless spirit. Locals had already retreated to their warm homes. But I found myself drawn to the allure of the frozen lake. The moonlight reflecting off the pristine ice. I had heard the stories. Tales of a man who stood silently on the ice, his face obscured by a long, dark hat. Those who dared to approach him reported hearing a faint whisper. "Don't step further," before the ice beneath them would crack ominously. Some never returned, their bodies lost to the icy depths, adding to the lake's haunted reputation. Determined to uncover the truth, I grabbed my gear and set out under the cover of darkness. The path to Blackwater Lake was familiar, yet tonight it felt different, as if the very air was thick with anticipation. The snow crunched under my boots, each step echoing in the silent night. As I reached the shoreline, the sight before me was both beautiful and eerie. The lake was a vast mirror of ice, undisturbed and flawless, except for a lone figure standing at the far end. My heart pounded in my chest as I approached, the cold biting through my layers. The man was motionless, his posture rigid, staring blankly into the void beyond. "Hey!" I called out softly, trying to mask the tremor in my voice. "Are you okay?" He didn't respond. Instead, I felt a shiver run down my spine as a faint whisper seemed to emanate from the ice itself. "Don't step further." I froze, listening intently. The whisper grew louder, more insistent, yet no one was around to hear it. My rational mind screamed that it was just the wind, playing tricks on me, but something deep inside knew better. The air felt heavy, charged with an unspoken warning. Ignoring the fear gnawing at my resolve, I took a step closer. The ice beneath my feet felt unnaturally solid, yet every instinct told me to retreat. The man remained still, his presence both haunting and sorrowful. I reached out a hand, my fingers inches from his cold form, when suddenly the ice cracked sharply beneath me. Panic surged through me as I stumbled backward, eyes wide with terror. The sound was deafening, a brutal reminder of the lake's deadly nature. I turned to run, but the darkness seemed to close in, the path back obscured by swirling snowflakes. The whispers returned, louder this time, echoing in my ears. "Don't step further." Desperation fueled my movements as I sprinted toward the shore, the ice groaning and shifting behind me. My breath came in ragged gasps, each step a battle against the encroaching cold. The figure of the man faded into the distance, his presence lingering like a shadow in my mind. I reached the safety of the shore, collapsing onto the snow, my body numb from the cold and fear. The whispers ceased, replaced by the soft rustle of the wind through the trees. I looked back at the lake, now calm and still, the figure gone without a trace. The legends were true. Blackwater Lake held secrets best left undisturbed. In the days that followed, I couldn't shake the image of that silent man, his haunted eyes and the dire warning that saved my life. The townsfolk remained tight-lipped, their respect for the lake's dark history unspoken but palpable. I understood now why Blackwater Lake was both revered and feared, a place where beauty and tragedy intertwined beneath a blanket of snow. I rarely ventured near the lake after that night, the memory serving as a constant reminder of nature's unforgiving power and the mysteries that lie hidden in its depths. But sometimes, on the coldest nights, when the wind howls just right, I swear I can hear the faint whispers carried across the ice, a spectral warning from the past: don't step further. And so, Blackwater Lake remains a frozen testament to the unknown, a place where legends live on in the silence of the snow, and where the echoes of the past continue to haunt the present. Story number 5. The Curse of the Red Scarf. I've always been fascinated by folklore and the eerie tales that linger in the shadows of forgotten villages. Growing up in a small town in Minnesota, I heard countless stories of haunted places and restless spirits, but none captivated me quite like the legend of the Red Scarf from Eastern Europe. It was said that a young woman, Amelia, had been cursed with a vibrant red scarf. If she ever removed it, winter would stretch on endlessly, trapping her spirit in a perpetual snowstorm. My journey to uncover the truth behind Amelia's curse began unexpectedly. As a graduate student studying anthropology, I was always on the lookout for genuine folktales to explore. When I stumbled upon the story of Amelia in an old Eastern European manuscript, I knew I had found my next project. The more I read, the more I was drawn into the tragic narrative of a love story turned nightmare. Amelia was a beautiful young woman from a remote village nestled deep within the Carpathian Mountains. Her red scarf was not just a fashion statement. It was a symbol of her love and devotion to her fiancé, Ivan. The villagers believed the scarf held protective powers, warding off the harsh winter and ensuring a bountiful harvest. Amelia and Ivan's love was the heart of the village, a beacon of hope during the long, cold months. But their happiness was short-lived. Ivan, driven by greed and jealousy, demanded that Amelia remove her red scarf. He couldn't understand why she clung to it so fiercely, not realizing the deep-rooted beliefs that held the village together. Under his relentless pressure, Amelia reluctantly took off the scarf, believing Ivan's promises that it would bring them closer together. The moment she did, the skies darkened, and a blizzard of unprecedented fury descended upon the village. The storm raged for days, unrelenting and merciless. Houses were buried under feet of snow, crops ruined, and the village plunged into despair. When the storm finally subsided, the devastation was complete. Amelia, along with her entire family, had vanished without a trace. The only evidence of their fate was the shattered remnants of their home, now buried in ice and snow. Local legends say that Amelia's spirit couldn't bear the loss and the consequence of removing her scarf. She became a restless ghost, eternally searching for her beloved Ivan amidst the endless winter. Every snowfall, the villagers reported seeing a figure clad in a red scarf wandering the frozen landscape, her presence both sorrowful and menacing. Driven by curiosity and a desire to document this haunting tale, I decided to travel to the remnants of Amelia's village. Armed with my camera, recording equipment, and an open mind, I ventured into the heart of the Carpathian wilderness. The journey was arduous, the biting cold and treacherous terrain testing my resolve at every step. As I approached the site where the village once stood, the air grew colder, and an oppressive silence enveloped the area. The landscape was a frozen wasteland, with only the skeletal remains of homes peeking through the thick ice. The wind howled through the trees, carrying whispers that seemed almost human. I set up my camp near what was once Amelia's house, determined to capture any signs of her lingering spirit. Night fell quickly, and with it came an eerie stillness. I spent the hours documenting the site, noting the intricate ice patterns and the remnants of Amelia's life frozen in time. As midnight approached, the temperature plummeted further, and the wind intensified, howling like a chorus of lost souls. It was then that I heard it, the soft, mournful cry of a child, echoing through the night air. My heart raced as I followed the sound, moving cautiously through the snow-covered ruins. The cry grew louder, more desperate, guiding me toward the center of the village. There, amidst the frozen remnants of homes and memories, stood a figure draped in a red scarf. She was Amelia, her presence both beautiful and tragic, her eyes hollow with eternal sorrow. "Why are you here?" I called out softly, my voice barely audible over the howling wind. She didn't respond. Instead, she began to walk towards me, her movements slow and deliberate. The scarf fluttered behind her, untouched by the biting cold, a stark contrast against the white snow. As she approached, I felt a chill deeper than the winter air, a sense of loss and longing that enveloped me. "Ivan," I whispered, the name slipping from my lips like a plea. Amelia stopped inches away, her gaze fixed on something beyond my sight. "Don't step further," she whispered, her voice a haunting melody that resonated deep within me. Before I could react, the ground beneath us began to tremble, the ice cracking ominously. Panic surged through me as I realized the danger we were in. The ice beneath my feet started to give way, the sound of it cracking echoing through the silent night. I took a step back, but the ground continued to crumble, pulling me towards the icy depths. Desperate to escape, I turned to run, but Amelia reached out, her hand stopping me mid-stride. "The scarf," she whispered, her eyes pleading. "Find the scarf. Save us." In that moment, everything went dark. I woke up hours later, alone in my camp, the morning sun beginning to melt the ice and snow. My equipment had been scattered, and Amelia was nowhere to be seen. Confused and shaken, I packed up my gear, the weight of her request heavy on my mind. Back in civilization, I immersed myself in research, determined to find the lost scarf and uncover the full extent of Amelia's curse. It was during this search that I discovered a hidden chamber beneath the remnants of her house, sealed tightly by time and ice. Inside, I found the red scarf, preserved despite the harsh conditions, its vibrant color a stark contrast against the frozen surroundings. Returning to the village site with the scarf in hand felt both triumphant and terrifying. As I placed the scarf back where Amelia had stood, the air grew still, and the oppressive cold lifted, replaced by a warm, gentle breeze that felt like a sigh of relief. The snow around me began to melt, revealing signs of life and hope amidst the devastation. A soft glow enveloped the area, and Amelia's spirit appeared once more, her expression now peaceful and serene. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice filled with gratitude. "Winter is over." With those final words, she faded into the light, her spirit finally finding the peace it had long been denied. The curse was lifted, and the eternal winter that had plagued the village was no more. The land began to thaw, the scars of the past slowly healing under the embrace of spring. The legend of Amelia and her red scarf serves as a poignant reminder of the power of love and the consequences of broken promises. As I reflect on my journey, I realize that some curses are born from deep sorrow and unresolved pain, and only through understanding and compassion can they be lifted. But sometimes, when the snow falls just right and the wind carries a whisper, I catch a faint echo of Amelia's gratitude, a gentle reminder that some spirits never truly fade and that every curse can be broken with a touch of kindness and a heart willing to listen. Story number 6. The Winter's Grasp. I never believed in curses. Growing up in the heart of Chicago, where the winters are long and unforgiving, I learned to endure the biting cold and relentless snow without attributing it to anything other than Mother Nature's temperament. But everything changed the winter I decided to uncover the truth behind my family's dark legacy. My name is Viktor Petrov, and my ancestors hailed from a remote village in Siberia, a place so isolated that it seemed forgotten by time itself. For 3 generations, our family carried a shadow that loomed over every winter. Each year, as the first snowflakes began to fall, one of us would succumb to an unexplained death. It was a grim tradition, a silent pact with fate that none of us dared to break. The stories began with my great-grandfather, Mikhail. In the early 1900s, Mikhail led a band of men into a sacred village nestled deep within the Siberian wilderness. They were hunters by trade, respected and feared for their prowess. But greed twisted their hearts, and they looted the village's treasures, ancient artifacts, sacred relics, and the spirits of the land itself. The villagers, desperate to protect their heritage, performed a ritual to ward off the invaders. Mikhail and his men returned to their village, but one by one, they perished in mysterious accidents during the harsh winters that followed. Generations passed, and the curse remained unbroken. My grandfather, Alexei, was the last of his line to escape the inevitable fate. He fled to America, hoping to sever the ties that bound us to the cursed land. But as fate would have it, the curse followed him across continents. The first winter in Chicago saw the untimely death of my grandmother, Elena, who slipped on icy sidewalks in the dead of night. My father, Dmitri, barely survived a tragic car accident during a blizzard, leaving him scarred both physically and mentally. Now, it was my turn, or so the grim pattern suggested. Driven by a mix of desperation and defiance, I decided to confront the curse head-on. Armed with old diaries, family records, and a burning desire to break free from the cycle of death, I traced my roots back to Siberia. The journey was arduous, the flight itself a nightmare of delays and snowstorms. When I finally arrived, the village seemed untouched by time, encased in a perpetual winter that mirrored the curse my family endured. The villagers greeted me with wary eyes and hushed whispers. They remembered the Petrov family all too well, the men who had desecrated their sacred grounds and the curse that ensued. An elderly woman named Irina took me under her wing, sharing stories of the past and the rituals that bound our fates. She spoke of the sacred relics my ancestors had stolen, the spirits that sought retribution, and the only way to lift the curse, a return of what was taken, accompanied by a heartfelt apology and a promise of respect. Determined to make amends, I delved into the remnants of my family's past. The ancestral home stood as a silent testament to our transgressions, its walls frozen in time, covered in layers of ice that seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy. In the attic, I found the most treasured of our stolen artifacts, a beautifully crafted snowflake pendant, adorned with intricate patterns and a deep crimson gem at its center. It was the key to lifting the curse. As I held the pendant, memories flooded my mind, visions of my great-grandfather's men looting the village, the villagers' desperate pleas, and the moment the curse was sealed, I knew what I had to do. With Irina by my side, I ventured into the heart of the village, where the sacred site lay buried beneath centuries of snow and ice. The air was thick with tension, the spirits of the land watching our every move. We began the ritual at twilight, the sky a canvas of bruised purples and fading oranges. Irina chanted ancient prayers, her voice steady and unwavering, while I held the pendant high, the crimson gem reflecting the fading light. The ground beneath us trembled, and the snow swirled into a vortex of ethereal energy. The spirits materialized, their forms both beautiful and terrifying, their eyes filled with sorrow and anger. I spoke directly to them, my voice cracking with emotion. I come to you with humility and remorse. We wronged you, took what was not ours to take. Please, forgive us and lift the curse that has plagued my family for generations. A deep silence followed my plea, the only sound the howling wind and the crackling of ice. Then, the pendant began to glow, its light piercing through the darkness. The spirits responded, their forms dissolving into beams of light that intertwined with the pendant's glow. The air warmed, the oppressive chill lifting as the spirits found peace. As the final words of the ritual echoed through the night, the snow began to melt, revealing the once-hidden sacred site in all its glory. The curse was lifted, the cycle of death broken. Tears streamed down my face as I realized the weight of our family's redemption and the end of the eternal winter that had haunted us for so long. I returned to Chicago a changed man, the curse no longer a shadow over my life. The winters remained cold, but they were no longer a harbinger of death. Instead, they became a reminder of the power of forgiveness and the strength it takes to right the wrongs of the past. But sometimes, on the coldest nights, when the wind howls through the streets and the snow blankets the city in silence, I catch a faint whisper on the breeze, a gentle reminder that some curses linger, waiting to be acknowledged and healed. It's a reminder that the past never truly dies and that the spirits of the land watch over us, seeking peace just as we do. Story number 7. Whispers of the Snow Carriage. I've always been fascinated by the old legends that our grandparents would recount by the fireside. Tales of spirits and curses that seemed too fantastical to believe. Growing up in the quaint town of Ashford, nestled in the heart of New England, I dismissed them as mere stories meant to entertain children. That was until the night I encountered the snow carriage, a nightmare that blurred the lines between myth and reality. It was the dead of winter, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones and makes every breath visible in the frigid air. Ashford was blanketed in a thick layer of snow. The landscape transformed into a serene, white expanse. The streets were eerily quiet, the usual hustle of the town muted under the weight of the season. I had stayed late at the local library, poring over old records for my thesis on regional folklore. As I packed up my things, the clock struck midnight, and I decided to walk home, savoring the solitude of the snowy night. The moon was a thin crescent, casting a pale light over the glistening snow. My footsteps crunched softly on the untouched drifts as I made my way through the familiar streets. Ashford was a small town, and I knew every corner, every alleyway. But tonight, something felt different, an unsettling stillness that set my nerves on edge. As I approached the outskirts of town, near the old railway tracks that had long been abandoned, I heard it, the unmistakable sound of hoofbeats echoing through the night. My heart raced as the rhythmic clatter grew louder, bouncing off the silent houses and empty streets. I turned to see a horse-drawn carriage emerging from the darkness, its wheels cutting through the snow with eerie precision. The carriage was a relic from a bygone era, its wooden frame worn and weathered by countless winters. The horses, thick-coated and powerful, trotted steadily, their breath forming clouds in the icy air. But what caught my attention was the driver, a man dressed in a long, dark coat, his face obscured by a wide-brimmed hat. There was something unnervingly still about him, an air of sorrow that seemed to emanate from his very presence. I stopped in my tracks, unable to tear my eyes away. The carriage continued its slow approach, passing by the old station where the tragedy had occurred decades ago. It was there that the legend began. A family of 5, victims of a brutal snowstorm, their lives claimed by the very carriage they had ridden to escape the cold. The town had whispered of a curse ever since, a haunting reminder of that fateful night. As the carriage passed, a chilling wind swept through the air, carrying with it the faint sound of children's laughter and the soft sobbing of a woman. I shivered, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. The stories had always mentioned that anyone who saw the snow carriage would meet misfortune. But I had never believed in curses until now. Suddenly, the carriage halted abruptly, the horses snorting and pawing at the ground. The man in the dark coat stepped out, his presence commanding despite the freezing temperatures. He extended a gloved hand, motioning for me to follow. My rational mind screamed at me to run, but something deep inside compelled me to obey. I hesitated for a moment, the legends swirling in my mind, but curiosity overpowered fear. I took a tentative step forward, then another, until I found myself walking alongside the Eerie carriage. The snow seemed to fall harder, the flakes swirling in a chaotic dance around us, reducing visibility to mere inches. We reached the old railway bridge, the site of the tragic accident. The man stopped and turned to face me, his face finally visible beneath the shadow of his hat. His eyes were hollow, filled with an endless sadness that pierced through my very soul. "Why have you come?" he asked, his voice a haunting whisper that seemed to blend with the howling wind. I swallowed hard, struggling to find my voice. "I saw your carriage. The legends. They say bad things happen to those who see you." He nodded slowly, his expression one of profound sorrow. "The curse is real, but it is not meant to harm. It is a reminder of the lives lost and the price of greed and despair." I felt a pang of guilt, remembering the stories my grandmother told me about how the family had been forced to flee their home, driven by desperation and the promise of a better life. "How can I help? How can we end this curse?" He extended his hand once more, this time without hesitation. "You must remember us, honor our memory and the lives we lost. Only then can we find peace and release the curse that binds us to this frozen land." I placed my hand in his, feeling a surge of warmth despite the biting cold. Images flooded my mind, visions of the family's last moments, the terror of the storm, and the hopelessness that had led to their untimely demise. Tears welled up in my eyes as I realized the weight of their sorrow and the burden of their unfinished business. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice breaking with emotion. "I promise to remember." As I spoke those words, the snow began to lighten, the oppressive weight of the curse lifting as if by magic. The man's form started to dissolve, his presence fading like the last remnants of a dream upon waking. "Thank you," he echoed, his voice a fading whisper carried away by the wind. The carriage reappeared beside me, the horses now calm and gentle, their breaths forming peaceful clouds in the cold night air. With a final nod, the snow carriage began to move, gliding silently across the snow-covered landscape until it vanished into the darkness, leaving behind a sense of peace and a town forever changed. In the aftermath of that night, Ashford felt lighter, as if a heavy burden had been lifted. The tragedies that had plagued our town for generations seemed to dissipate, replaced by a newfound sense of unity and remembrance. Families came together to honor the lost, sharing stories and ensuring that the lives of the cursed family were never forgotten. I continued my studies, delving deeper into the folklore and legends that shaped our community. The story of the snow carriage became a cornerstone of our local history, a testament to the enduring power of memory and the human spirit's capacity for redemption. The curse was lifted, not through fear or force, but through compassion and the simple act of remembering those who had been lost. But sometimes, during the quiet moments of winter, when the snow falls thick and heavy, I catch a faint whisper on the breeze, a soft, sorrowful echo that reminds me of that night and the promise I made. It's a gentle reminder that some spirits linger, not out of malice, but out of a need to be remembered and honored. And so, the legend of the snow carriage lives on, not as a tale of fear, but as a story of love, loss, and the unbreakable bonds that connect us all. Even in the coldest of winters,